They will tell you the story began with the alpha. They are wrong. The alpha arrived at the scene with his war council and his reputation and the particular quality of presence that made the air in a room reorganize itself around him, and he stood over the body and the council waited for him to speak with the reverence of people who have decided in advance that whatever he produces will be the answer. Every wolf in that room looked at him the way they always looked at him. Like he was the solution to whatever problem the universe had recently created. He was not the solution. Not to this one. The solution was standing at the back of the room in plain clothes with her hands in her pockets and her eyes moving across the scene with the particular focus quality of someone reading a language no one else in the room had learned. She had been standing there for 11 minutes before he arrived. She had already worked out the most important part. She did not announce it. Not then. Not because she was afraid. Because she was waiting for the right moment and she knew precisely when that moment would be, and she was patient in the way that only people who have been underestimated their entire lives learn to be patient, which is deeply and without bitterness and with a great deal of very specific purpose. Subscribe now. Follow the story. Share it with anyone who has ever been the quietest person in the room and the only one paying attention. Now. Let's begin the story. The fourth body was found on a Tuesday. Not that the day of the week carried the weight it carries for humans, with their calendars and their structured weeks and their forward-marching numbered squares. It mattered because Tuesday was Council Day. Tuesday meant that every senior wolf in the Greymoor pack was in one room with their attention on politics and territorial negotiation and the slow ongoing stalemate with the Ashfin pack to the south, and no eyes were on the perimeter of the pack lands, and whoever had killed Sentinel Bram Hollowick had known that. Had planned around it. Had counted on it the way a professional counts on the things that do not change. Mirela Voss found the body at 7:30 in the morning, coming back from her pre-dawn observation post at the eastern border. She was 19 years old. Her assignment was border monitoring, because border monitoring required patience and stillness and attention to very small things, qualities her superiors had identified as appropriately omega and therefore unthreatening and therefore safe to hand to someone they did not expect much from. They meant the assignment as a ceiling. She had treated it as a foundation. She found the body and she did not scream. She crouched beside it in the cold wet grass and she looked at it the way her grandmother had taught her to look at things that mattered, completely and without hurrying toward a conclusion, without allowing what she expected to see to replace what was actually in front of her. Bram Hollowick had been a beta sentinel. 31 years old. Tall and heavily built. A man who had been genuinely difficult to hurt for a long time and who showed the specific confidence of someone who knows that about themselves. He was lying on his back with his arms at his sides, and that was the first thing that was wrong, because no one who had been in a fight fell like that. You fell forward or sideways or with your hands out because your hands go out when you fall. It is older than thought, it is the body trying to catch itself. Arms at the sides meant placement. Meant someone had arranged him after the fact, with the particular care of someone managing a scene. The second thing that was wrong was the absence of struggle. The grass around the body was undisturbed. His hands were clean. His uniform carried none of the twisting and pulling that fighting does to fabric. He had been found here but he had not died here, which meant he had been moved, or he had died so quickly there was no fight to have, and the second option was the more frightening one. The third thing she noticed she kept to herself. Not because she doubted it. Because she had learned, in the weeks since the first body, that the difference between being heard and being dismissed was the difference between certainty and almost certainty, and she was not yet at certainty. She filed it in the precise organized interior library she had been building since she was 14, cataloging what she observed about everything that seemed to matter, and she covered it over with the ordinary responses of someone who had just found a body in the grass. She raised the alarm. She gave her report to the duty sergeant. She answered the questions put to her clearly and in order and without embellishment, which was the most professional thing she knew how to do and which cost her something every time because the questions never reached deep enough. Then she went home and she opened her notebook and she wrote down the third thing. The grass beneath Bram Hollowick's body carried 2 scents. His own, which was expected. And a second scent, very faint, almost entirely masked, that she had only caught because she had been still and close and because her sense of smell was not the broad, dominant alpha range detection built for tracking at distance, but the fine-grained, close-reading omega variety, built for something more like analysis than pursuit. The second scent was not one she recognized. But it had a quality she could describe precisely. It smelled like cold iron and river water and something underneath both of those things that she did not yet have a word for. Something that felt managed. Not a smell that had happened to be present, but a smell that had been carefully reduced until almost nothing of it remained, and the almost was the mistake. She wrote all of it down. She had been writing things down for 5 weeks, since the first body, a pack elder named Suzanne Velt, who had been found in her own home with the same arms at the side stillness and the same absence of struggle and the same trace of that same carefully masked scent that Mirela alone had identified. She had not reported the scent after the first body because she had not been certain, and because when she had raised her hand in the first briefing to offer an observation, Sentinel Commander Arnek had looked at her with an expression that communicated very efficiently that the briefing was not a space for people of her rank and designation, and she had lowered her hand and decided she would not speak again until the evidence was complete. After the second body she was 70% certain. After the third she was 90%. After the fourth she put on her coat and she walked to the pack council hall and she knocked on the door of the one person in the senior structure she had calculated was most likely to listen to an omega with a notebook and a scent theory and no formal authority whatsoever. She knocked on the door of the alpha. His name was Aldrin Voss, which was also her surname, and he was not her father, not her uncle, not any kind of blood relation. She had taken his name the way wolves sometimes took the name of a pack alpha they owed a debt to, as a formal marker of the bond without being a claim on it. He had not asked her to. She had done it when she was 12, after he pulled her out of a bad situation on the eastern border that she had not been supposed to be near and had been near anyway because there was something she needed to see, and he had not interrogated her about it. He had only gotten her out and checked her for injuries and sent her home with a look that she had spent 7 years since trying to accurately name. The look was not warmth, precisely. It was not the look of someone who had decided to take care of her. It was the look of someone who had looked at her and found something worth looking at again, which was not nothing, coming from a wolf who was generally considered to look at the world with the strategic dispassion of someone running a calculation that never stopped. Aldrin Voss was 34 years old and he had been alpha of the Greymoor pack for 6 years, which meant he had taken the title at 28, which was young enough to be unusual and old enough that no one had seriously challenged it. He had not inherited the position. He had earned it in the way alphas earn things when there is no inheritance to collect. Which is a process that is not discussed in polite company and which Mirela had read about in historical records she was not technically authorized to access and which left her with a detailed understanding of what he was capable of when he decided something needed resolving. He was very large. Not the theatrical large of someone who cultivated size as a message. The functional large of someone shaped by genuine demand, by years of being the wolf that other wolves measured themselves against. Deep brown-black skin, the kind that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. A broad face with a jaw that looked cut from something harder than bone. Dark eyes that had never once wavered in 7 years of occasional, careful observation. He kept his hair close to his skull. He had a scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, old and settled, a story he had never told in her presence. He was also, in her considered assessment, the most intelligent wolf in the pack, which was why she was at his door with her notebook. She knocked. A pause. Then his voice came through the door, low and carrying and without particular inflection, "Come in." She went in. He was at the long table that served as his working desk, papers spread before him, dressed in the dark operational clothing he wore when working rather than the formal council attire he wore for public function. He looked up when she entered. His eyes moved to her notebook. They moved back to her face. Aldrin spoke first. Just her name, Mirela. She came directly to the point. "I know who is doing it." A pause followed. He was very still in the way that very controlled people become still when they have been told something that requires genuine processing. Not frozen. Waiting. "Sit down," he told her. She sat. She opened the notebook. She talked. She talked for 22 minutes, which was longer than she had talked in front of anyone in a long time, and she did not rush and she did not simplify and she did not leave out the parts that sounded unusual because she had decided that the unusual parts were precisely the parts that most needed saying. She talked about the scent. She talked about the placement of each body. She talked about the timing pattern she had identified over 5 weeks, the specific rotation of which sentinels were absent from which positions at each killing, and the way the murders mapped precisely onto those gaps, which meant the killer had detailed knowledge of the pack's security architecture that was not available to anyone outside the senior structure. She talked about the things she had noticed after the third body that she had not told anyone. The killer is not a rogue, she continued, her voice steady throughout. Rogues smell of themselves. This person smells of deliberate concealment, which requires specialist knowledge of how wolf scent detection works. And the gaps being exploited in the patrol rotation are gaps that were revised 3 months ago. That revision was not posted publicly. It was distributed to senior sentinels and council members only. She closed the notebook. She held his gaze. The killer is inside this pack. Senior access. Possibly council level. He looked at her for a long time. Not the way people look at you when they are deciding whether to believe you. The way people look at you when they have already decided and are now thinking about what comes next. You have been tracking this since the first body, he observed. The statement carried no question mark. He already knew. Since the morning after, she confirmed. Alone. There was no one to track it with me. Something moved through his expression that was not quite readable but was not indifference. How certain are you? He pressed. Completely. She met his eyes without flinching. About the pattern and the profile. About the specific identity, I have a strong candidate but I need access to the duty records for the last 4 months to confirm. I do not have that access. I do, he answered. I know. That is why I am here. He looked at her for another moment. Then he stood, which meant she stood, which was automatic and which she slightly resented even as she understood it. He was considerably taller than her and the room was not large and for a moment the space between them had that quality she occasionally noticed and always set aside, the particular quality of two things being drawn toward each other by a force neither of them had yet named aloud. She set it aside. She was working. The duty records are in the archive room, he told her. Come with me. She followed. Her notebook was open. Her pen was ready. Her wolf, small and deep and very, very quiet, was more alert than it had been in months. Something was beginning. She could feel the shape of it the way she felt the shape of everything that mattered, not with drama or premonition, but with the calm forward-reading attention of someone who had trained themselves to see a little further than the edge of what was immediately in front of them. She followed the Alpha into the archive room and the door closed behind them and the work began. The archive room smelled of old paper and lamp oil and the specific dry cold of a space kept too organized for comfort. Mirella had been in it twice before, both times under supervision, both times for purposes unrelated to what she was about to do. Aldrin unlocked it with his own key, which meant no record of their presence would exist in the duty log, which she noted and appreciated without mentioning. The duty records were organized by month and cross-indexed by rotation assignment. She knew what she was looking for. She had built the analytical framework in her notebook over 5 weeks and she only needed the raw data to lay over it and see what aligned. She worked quickly. Aldrin watched her work without interrupting, which she was aware of in the specific peripheral way she was always aware of where he was in a room, and she did not let the awareness interrupt her because the work was what mattered right now and the awareness could wait. In 40 minutes she had what she needed. She spread 3 pages of notes on the table and looked up at him. Davin Crail. He went very still. She continued without pausing. Senior Sentinel, 8 years with the pack, access to the full rotation schedule as of 4 months ago when he was promoted to Arnex Direct Command. On duty during 3 of the 4 deaths, assigned to the north perimeter each time, which was the furthest position from where the bodies were found. She looked at her notes. The north perimeter assignment, for all 3 incidents, was self-reported. No second confirmation exists. Self-reported sentinel assignments are standard practice for the overnight rotation, he pointed out. I know. She looked at him steadily. It is also the single most exploitable gap in the entire system. One person, no corroboration, 3 critical nights. She tapped the page. And Davin Crail's sent profile is in the pack register. I matched the baseline against what I recorded at the 4th scene. You matched a partial mask sent from field conditions against a register record, he observed slowly. I know how that sounds. Tell me how confident you are. The iron note in the field sent matched the iron note in his register profile at a specificity I would stake my life on. She paused. I am staking multiple other lives on it. I am aware of that. But I am not wrong. Another silence. In the silence Mirella could hear the building settling around them, the small sounds of old stone, and distantly the voices of the pack going about its morning, all that ordinary life continuing in the middle of the worst thing to happen to Greymoor in 20 years. Davin Crail trained under the Ashvin pack for 2 years before coming to us, Aldrin said after a moment. She looked at him carefully. You already suspected him. I suspected the source. Not the mechanism. He was quiet for a beat. The Ashvin pack has been in territorial negotiations with us for 6 years. The process has not been clean. I have suspected a border intelligence leak for months, but the pattern never cohered enough to identify where it originated. The killings are not primarily about intelligence leaks, she told him. No. She pushed forward. The 4 victims. Suzanne Velt. Border analyst Corey Dan. Patrol leader Marsh Holst. Sentinel Bram Hollowick. She looked at him. What connects them? He was still for a moment. Then he answered carefully. Suzanne Velt was on the committee that recommended the security protocol overhaul 3 years ago. Corey Dan had been independently tracking the border leak pattern. Marsh Holst had flagged anomalous patrol behavior twice in the last 6 months. She gathered her notes. I will have the confirmation by tomorrow morning. I will be in the room next to yours, he told her. She stopped. She turned to look at him. That is not operationally necessary. No, he acknowledged. It is not. She understood what he was not saying. She filed it in the same careful interior library where she filed everything that mattered and that needed time before it could be properly examined. There was a great deal of material in that library by now. 7 years of careful observation and equally careful deferral. She went to work. The secure room Aldrin arranged was in the pack house's inner wing, stone-walled, sound-dampened, the kind of room that held sensitive conversations and left no record of them in the ordinary flow of the building. She set up in 20 minutes and began. The intelligence archive arrived in sections, delivered by a member of Aldrin's personal guard who asked no questions and did not linger. She organized it in her system, which was not a system anyone else would have recognized as a system but which was entirely coherent to her, cross-referenced by date and name and event, with margin notations in the small precise script she had been using since she was 14. She worked through the afternoon and into the evening. She worked through the part of the night where exhaustion becomes something you simply decide not to participate in. The lamp burned low twice and she refilled it without fully registering that she had done so. At 2 in the morning she found the confirmation. It was buried in the communication logs. A section of the archive requiring a specific authorization code that Aldrin had given her without being asked, which told her something about how far his trust extended. Buried in 8 months of routine pack documentation was a pattern of outgoing messages filed as maintenance reports. Maintenance reports were low security and low attention documents that everyone sent and no one read carefully. The maintenance reports from the North Perimeter Station, filed weekly by Davin Crail, were too long. Standard maintenance reports ran a quarter page. His averaged a full page, with the additional content encoded in the body of the formal text in a cipher that was sophisticated enough to evade automated review and straightforward enough that she broke it in 40 minutes with the pattern analysis she had taught herself from a cryptography manual she had found in the archive itself. The decoded content was not maintenance reports. They were detailed summaries of pack security protocols, patrol rotations, the locations of sensitive infrastructure, assessments of senior wolves, and the progress of any investigation into border intelligence leaks. The most recent, sent 5 days ago, contained the information that the Alpha had scheduled a senior security review for this Friday, which Aldrin had announced to the council only a week ago. She photographed every page with the small portable camera from the archive supply room. She assembled the complete evidence file. She wrote her summary in the careful, precise language of a formal brief, the kind of document that could be presented to a tribunal and withstand every challenge put to it. She checked it twice and then a third time because 3 times was what certainty required. Then she sat very still in the lamplit room and she spoke quietly to no one in particular. "I have you." It was 3 a.m. when the corridor outside went wrong. Not a sound, precisely. The particular quality of movement she had spent 5 weeks thinking about, the almost silence that was not quite silence because nothing that moved was ever perfectly silent. The careful cadence of someone who had done this before and was doing it exactly right. Almost exactly right. David Crail had calculated that she would be working. He had calculated that the Alpha would be elsewhere, occupied with the council briefing that had been publicly scheduled for 3 a.m. as a security precaution. He had calculated that the secure room had one exit facing the corridor and that the corridor carried no posted guard because she was Omega and no one had thought to post a guard for an Omega with a notebook. He had not calculated that Mirela had recognized 3 hours ago that she was going to receive a visitor tonight, and had spent the last hour preparing for it. She stood. She moved to the side of the door, not behind the desk where anyone entering would expect to find her. She had her hand on the iron document press she had taken from the archive supply closet, which was not a weapon but was approximately the weight of one and could be made to function as one if the application was correct and precise. She waited. The door handle moved. Very slowly. The door opened inward toward the desk, which meant the first thing anyone entering would see was an empty desk in the lamplight. The moment of recalibration. The pause that confusion creates. That pause was all she needed. David Crail came through the door. Larger than her, moving with the controlled efficiency of 8 years of sentinel training. A blade in his right hand, silver-edged, the kind that cut deeper than the physical dimension of the cut. He saw the empty desk. He paused. That was enough. She came from his left, the side opposite his blade hand, and she drove the iron press into the base of his right wrist with the exact force she had calculated to disrupt the grip without the noise of a break. The blade went to the floor. She kicked it under the desk before it had finished sliding. He turned fast. Faster than she had expected, and she had expected fast. His free hand came around and caught her shoulder and he was larger and he used that, tried to use momentum against her, tried to drive her into the wall. And she let him think it was working for 2 steps and then she dropped her weight in the specific way her grandmother had shown her for bodies lighter than their opponents, and he went off balance because he had committed to a momentum that suddenly had nothing to push against. She put him on the floor. Not cleanly. It was not elegant. It was exactly what it needed to be, which was effective, and she came away from it with a bruised shoulder and a cut along her forearm where his ring had caught her skin, the improvised tool of someone experienced enough to know that everything is a weapon. But he was on the floor and she had the iron press and she had the precise knowledge of the pressure points her grandmother had catalogued in a small book that Mirela had memorized at 16, and she applied one of them with absolute exactness. David Crail stopped moving. She stood over him for a moment. Her breathing was controlled. She had made it controlled deliberately, during the brief violent seconds of the confrontation, because controlled breathing was the most important thing her grandmother had ever taught her about a fight and she had not forgotten it. She looked down at him and she spoke quietly and without heat, "I know about Ashvin. I know about the communication cipher. I know about all 4 of them." He looked up at her with an expression she had not anticipated. Not rage and not fear but something closer to a very specific kind of shock, the shock of someone whose fundamental operating assumption has just proved incorrect. He had assumed she was nothing. He had assumed she was the safest possible target. He had been wrong about both of those things in the most consequential way possible. She told him, "Stay where you are." She went to the door. She opened it. She spoke into the corridor, calm and level, "Now." Aldrin came through the door in 4 seconds with 2 of his senior guard at his back, which meant he had been in the corridor the entire time, close enough to hear, far enough to stay out of what she needed to handle herself. He had trusted her to need him when she told him she needed him and not a moment before. He looked at Davin Crail on the floor. He looked at Mirella, at the blood on her forearm, at the iron press in her hand, at her expression, which was level and complete and utterly without drama. "Are you hurt?" he asked. The way he asked it, it was not the question the words implied. It was something else with the same shape. "Minor," she answered. "The evidence file is complete. It is on the table. It is sufficient for a full tribunal." He was still looking at her. Not at the secured threat on the floor. At her. "Mirella," he started. "He is still conscious," she pointed out. "You should secure him before he recalibrates." He held her gaze for one more moment with that expression that had so many layers she had never finished cataloging them. And then he turned to his guard and gave the necessary orders with the efficient quiet of someone who had been giving necessary orders for a long time and had no need to raise his voice to do it. Davin Crail was secured and removed from the room in less than 3 minutes. Then they were alone in the small stone room with the evidence spread on the table and the blade under the desk and the lamp still burning and the pack sleeping beyond the walls. She put the iron press down. She let out a breath that had been somewhere in her chest for a long time, possibly the entire night. "It is done," she told the room. He crossed the room. He was very close, the way he had been in the archive room and in the other rooms before that, and he lifted her injured arm by the wrist with careful hands, very gently, and looked at the cut across her forearm. "Not serious," she told him before he could speak. "I know," he replied, and continued looking at it anyway. His hands were warm. She had noticed before, on the rare occasions she had been close enough to register it, that his hands were always warm. "I was in the corridor," he told her quietly. "I heard it." "I knew you were there," she answered. "You did not call for me." "I did not need you yet." "No," he acknowledged. He lifted his eyes from her arm to her face, and the expression that met her was not the complicated layered thing it usually was. All the layers had collapsed into one thing. Something simple and very certain. "You did not." The lamp was burning. The evidence was on the table. The pack was sleeping and would wake to a morning that was safer than the morning it had gone to sleep in, because she had been awake all night making it so. Her arms stung. She was tired in a way she had not let herself feel until this moment, the particular exhaustion that arrives when you have been running on purpose for a long time and the purpose is completed. She was also, she recognized with the same precision she brought to everything else, the most awake she had been in a long time. She spoke his name into the quiet room, "Aldrin." He answered without moving, "Yes." "The library," she told him. He looked at her, not understanding. "The one I keep," she continued. "The interior one. There is a section in it that I have been filing things in for 7 years without examining them." She met his gaze directly. "I think I should examine them now." He was very still. "Yes," he observed slowly. "I think you should." She looked at him. She looked at 7 years of deferred things and the evidence on the table and the long night behind her and the morning coming through the crack under the door and the first thin gray line of it. "You should know that I am going to be very methodical about it," she warned him. He made a sound she had never heard from him before. A sound that was not exactly a laugh but was warmer than anything else she had heard from him, something that came from somewhere real and unguarded. "I know," he told her, and the way he produced those 2 words made it clear he was counting on it. By the time the Greymoor Pack Council convened the emergency session at 8 in the morning, word had moved through the pack in the particular fast and layered way that significant events move through a community of wolves, not rumor exactly, more like a collective adjustment of understanding, the pack sense registering that something fundamental had shifted in the night without yet knowing its full shape. The full shape, when it was formally presented, produced a silence that had several qualities simultaneously. The first quality was relief. the particular relief of a threat removed after a long period of sustained background dread. The Greymoor pack had been carrying the weight of 4 unsolved killings for 2 months, and the specific psychological burden of not knowing which among them was dangerous, and the removal of that uncertainty was like a change in air pressure, something the body registered before the mind caught up. The second quality was adjustment. The evidence brief presented by Aldrin Voss at the Emergency Council session had not been compiled by the senior intelligence team or the Sentinel Command or any of the official structures paid and authorized to produce such things. It had been compiled by a 19-year-old Omega border monitor whose formal authority extended to watching the Eastern Line and filing reports that Sentinel Commander Arnek had been effectively ignoring for 5 weeks. The Council looked at the brief. They looked at the Alpha. They looked at the brief again. Arnek, who had the disadvantage of knowing that his own briefings were somewhere in the background of this document and not in a flattering position, maintained a careful silence, which was probably the wisest decision he had made in 2 months. Aldrin presented the evidence clearly and without embellishment. He described the scent pattern identification, the communication cipher, the pattern analysis, the recruitment of Davin Crail by the Ashfin pack, the 8 months of documented intelligence transmission, and the 4 murders, each of which had targeted a wolf who was independently getting close to discovering the truth. Then he named Mirela Voss as the primary investigator. He named her in the same tone he used for everything, factual and level, and then he paused and told the Council that was not a complete description of what she had done. He told them, the investigation was conducted by Mirela Voss alone, without support, without authorization, and without resources beyond her own notebook and her own access, over a period of 5 weeks beginning the morning after the first death. She identified the killer from physical evidence at the scene of the 4th murder. She compiled the pattern analysis from pack records she was not authorized to access and found ways to access them anyway. She identified the communication cipher and broke it in 40 minutes working alone at 2 in the morning. She constructed the trap that produced the arrest. When the suspect entered the secure room last night with a blade and lethal intent, she took him down without backup and held him until the guard arrived. He let that settle. Then he continued, she is 19 years old and she is an Omega and she is the reason this pack is not looking at a 5th body this morning. He looked around the table at each face. I want that understood clearly and formally by everyone in this room. The silence took on a 3rd quality. Not quite the collective embarrassment of people who had missed what was in front of them, because collective embarrassment requires a self-awareness that groups often resist. Something closer to the quiet of people who are updating a belief system and finding the process uncomfortable. Mirela was not in the room. She had been in the healer's rooms for the forearm cut, which required 3 stitches and a bandage and the healer's professional opinion that she should sleep, which she intended to do as soon as this was finished. She had given Aldrin her complete evidence file and told him to present it however he judged best. She understood that some things landed differently in rooms she was not in, and she had enough trust in his judgment to step out of this one. She did not need to be in the room. She had done the work. The work spoke for itself. She was sitting on the stone steps outside the pack house in the thin winter morning light when he came out. 2 hours after the session had concluded. The formal detention of Davin Crail processed, the communication with the Ashfin pack leadership initiated through channels that would spend the next several months making the Ashfin leadership regret their investment. She had her notebook open and she was writing. Not the case notes, those were complete. The beginning of the next thing, because there was always a next thing and she had learned that the best time to begin it was when the last thing was still warm. He came out and he sat beside her on the steps, which was not something the Alpha of the Greymoor pack typically did, sitting on stone steps in the cold beside a 19-year-old Omega who was writing in a notebook, and she was aware of the pack members who passed in the courtyard below looking up at them with expressions she did not yet have the processing capacity to catalog. It is done, he told her. I know. Crail will stand tribunal next month. The Ashfin pack is being formally notified of the breach. The Council is initiating a review of all self-reported overnight positions. They should have done that 6 weeks ago, she pointed out. Yes, he agreed. They should have. He paused. Arnek submitted a formal acknowledgement of the intelligence gaps in his division. It was the most uncomfortable thing I have witnessed him do in 6 years. Good. The council voted this morning to create a new position. Chief Pack Intelligence Analyst. Direct report to the Alpha's office. Cross-authorization across all Pack archives. She did not look up from her notebook. Who are they appointing? She asked. They are offering it to you. She looked up. He was looking at her with that expression she was in the process of examining for the first time, all those layers she had been filing for 7 years, and it was large and it was complicated and it was also, she understood now that she was actually looking at it, very simple in its center. That is not an Omega-designated position, she observed. No. The council agreed. The council agreed. He paused. They had very little choice given the evidence before them. They were also correct to agree. He looked at her directly. You were correct about everything. The designation has nothing to do with it. The designation never had anything to do with it, she told him. No, he acknowledged. He held her gaze. It never did. She looked at him. She thought about 7 years of careful filing and the long night and the iron press and the morning coming through the crack under the door and the things in the library she had not yet finished examining, which she had been examining since 3 in the morning and intended to continue examining for as long as it took, because that was how she did everything that mattered. Yes, she told him. To the position. Good. I have conditions. Tell me. She told him. Full archive access. A dedicated workspace. Her reports going directly to the Alpha's office and not through Sentinel Command. The right to recruit her own support team without designation restrictions. 3 other things she had been thinking about since the archive room the previous day. She told him all of it, clearly and in order, because this was how she operated and she saw no reason to operate differently now. He agreed to every item without hesitation or negotiation. That was very easy, she observed. You were right about all of them, he replied simply. Why would I argue? She looked at him. Most people argue even when they know I am right. I am not most people, he told her. No, she agreed, looking back at her notebook. You are not. He spoke her name. Just her name, the way it sounded when he spoke it, different from how anyone else spoke it, with that slight additional weight she had been filing in the library for 2 years without examining. I am going to sleep, she told him. I promised the healer I would. Yes, he agreed. He paused. When you wake up. When I wake up. The library, he told her. The things you have not examined. She looked at him. I am examining them. It is a process. I know, he told her. And the way he produced those 2 words, warm in the center and entirely certain, communicated clearly that he was not concerned about the timeline. I will wait. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she closed her notebook and she stood and he stood beside her and they were both on the steps in the cold morning light and the world was going about its ordinary life around them and something between them was not ordinary at all and both of them knew it and neither of them was in a hurry because the important things never required hurry. You were in the corridor all night, she told him. Yes. That was not operationally necessary. No, he confirmed. It was not. You were concerned. Yes. For the operation. No. He looked at her, that simple certain thing fully visible in his expression. For you. She stood with that for a moment. She let it be what it was. She did not process it away. Good night, Aldrin. It was morning and they both knew it. Good night, Mirela, he replied. She went inside. She slept for 11 hours, which was the most consecutive sleep she had gotten in 5 weeks, and her wolf, that small deep quiet thing, did not stand watch the way it had been standing watch since the first body. It curled up and it rested and it was, she understood upon waking, content in a way it had not been in a long time. Because the danger was past. And the thing she had been building in her library was not going to be deferred anymore. She woke up and she got her notebook. She had work to do. The tribunal date was set for 4 weeks out, which was fast by Graymore PAC standards, and which Aldrin pushed for on the grounds that the PAC needed resolution and the evidence was comprehensive enough that prolonging the process served no one except people who wanted the PAC to remain unsettled. The council agreed. The council had been agreeing with him more readily since the emergency session, which she observed without comment. 3 things happened in the week after David Crail's arrest that mattered beyond the immediate case. The first was the formal notification to the Ashford PAC. Aldrin handled it himself, which was unusual, and which communicated to the Ashford leadership a degree of personal gravity that a formal letter through the diplomatic channel would not have. The response from Ashford took 2 days to arrive and was full of the particular careful language of an institution managing its exposure, denials of official knowledge, expressions of regret for the actions of a former operative whose contract with their security division had been, they claimed, terminated 18 months ago. Nobody in the Graymore Council believed it. Nobody was supposed to. The point was the record, and the record was now established. The second was the departure of Sentinel Commander Arnek. He did not resign. He submitted a formal request for reassignment to Border Scout work, which was a position 2 full ranks below his current one, and which nobody who understood what he was asking could read as anything other than a man removing himself from a position of authority he had demonstrated he was not fit for. Aldrin accepted the request the same day it was submitted, without comment, which was its own kind of statement. Mireille heard about it from Corin, the senior guard who had been first through the door the night of the arrest, and she wrote it in her notebook without writing what she thought about it, because what she thought about it was not appropriate for a professional document and she had standards about her notebooks. The third thing was the wolf inside her. This requires some explanation, because it was not something she had planned for, and Mireille had made a practice of planning for things. She had shifted before, in the ordinary ceremonial way at 16, and twice since in the private way that wolves sometimes shift when something requires it and the ceremony is not available. Her wolf form was small and dark-furred, the color of deep water in low light, almost invisible at night. She had always thought of her wolf as the quietest part of herself, which was saying something because she was already a quiet person. Her wolf was the part that went even further down. But on the 5th day after the arrest, 3 hours before dawn, she woke to something she had not been expecting. Not a sound from outside. Not an alarm. Something inside her, in the part of her that was wolf before it was anything else, rising in the way that the ocean rises before a tide, slow and inevitable and enormous. She lay still in the dark and she assessed it the way she assessed everything, and what she found was that her wolf was not distressed. Was not responding to threat. Was responding to something else entirely, something she had not catalogued before, something adjacent to the relief she had felt when the case was closed but deeper and more personal and pointed in a very specific direction. She shifted before she fully decided to. The shift of a deep omega, the true designation rather than the diminished misunderstanding of it, is not dramatic. It is not the explosive physical assertion of an alpha shift, all mass and dominance and the landscape reorganizing around the force of it. It is quieter and stranger and in its own way more complete. She felt the world open around her, every sense expanding to a degree that was briefly overwhelming, every scent and sound and texture of the night air suddenly fully present and available at a resolution that ordinary perception did not reach. She stood in wolf form in her room and she understood, in the full open state of the shift, what her wolf had been telling her for 5 weeks. She understood the library. Not intellectually. She had understood it intellectually already. She understood it now in the way you understand something you have been circling for a long time when you finally stop circling and stand still in the center of it. The 7 years of filed and deferred material in her interior library was not complicated. It had never been complicated. She had made it complicated by insisting on waiting for a certainty that did not need the kind of evidence a tribunal required. Some things were already proven and only needed acknowledging. She shifted back. She picked up her notebook. She did not write in it. She sat on the edge of her bed in the pre-dawn quiet and she thought about what came next with the particular focused attention she brought to every question that mattered. What came next was simple. What came next was her going to tell him. She put on her coat. She went out into the corridor. The Alpha's rooms were in the north wing, which was 4 corridors and a staircase from hers, and she walked there in the pre-dawn dark with the purposeful, unhurried pace of someone who has made a decision and is not second-guessing it. The corridor outside his rooms was empty, which was unusual, and which meant either the night guard had made a rotation error or Aldrin had told them he would not need guarding tonight, which was something he sometimes did and which always made his security team deeply unhappy. She knocked twice. A pause. Then his voice, fully awake, because she had the impression he was always fully awake the moment he was no longer asleep, with no gradual transition between the states, "Come in." She went in. He was standing at the window, in the dark clothes he slept in, looking out at the pre-dawn sky over the Packlands. He turned when she entered. He looked at her with that expression, and she looked at him, and the room was very quiet. She spoke first. "I shifted tonight." He waited. Not because of a threat. She came a few steps further into the room. "Because my wolf decided it was time to stop waiting for me to catch up to something it already understood." His expression shifted by the particular millimeter that, on his face, was equivalent to a significant change. "What did it understand?" he asked. She held his gaze. She told him, "You." The words sat in the room between them. He was very still. Not the controlled stillness of a man managing his response. The stillness of a man who has been waiting for a specific thing for a long time and is in the first moment of it arriving. He crossed the room. He came to stand in front of her, close in the way he had been close in the archive room and the secure room and on the steps and every room between, and she looked up at him and she did not look away. He spoke her name, Mirela. "I know," she answered, before he could continue. "I know I am 19 and you are 34 and I know what the pack will think and I know it is complicated and I know there are 100 professional considerations." She paused. "I have catalogued all of them. I do not find them persuasive." Something moved through his expression that she had not seen before, something warm and almost undone. "What do you find persuasive?" he asked. "The evidence," she told him. 7 years of it. He put one hand against the side of her face, very carefully, with the specific gentleness that always seemed incongruent with everything else about him and which she had always found the most honest thing about him. She leaned into it. Not by much. By exactly as much as she meant, which was more than it looked. "I have been waiting," he told her. "I know." She met his eyes. "You were patient. You required patience." "I required certainty," she corrected. "There is a difference." He made that sound again, the warm unguarded one. "Yes," he acknowledged. "There is." She told him, "I am certain now." He said, "Yes." She told him, "I want you to know that I will be very difficult to work with if this goes wrong." "It will not go wrong," he told her. "That is a faith-based statement, not an evidence-based one," she pointed out. He looked at her with everything open. "I have 7 years of evidence that your judgment is the best I have encountered," he answered. "And my own judgment about things that matter." He paused. "I have never had better grounds for faith." She thought about that. She thought about the eastern border at 12 and the notebook at 14 and the first body and the 4 weeks alone in the dark and the iron press and the cold floor and the morning coming through the crack under the door and all of it, the whole accumulation of it, every single piece of the path that had brought her to this specific room in this specific dark. She replied, "That is, actually, evidence-based." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he bent his head and kissed her forehead, which was not what she had expected and was entirely right. Not a dramatic declaration. Something quieter and more permanent. The act of a man who had decided something and was not going to undecide it. She stood in the pre-dawn dark and she let it be what it was. Her wolf was fully still below her. Not the vigilant stillness of something watching for threat. The deep, settled stillness of something that has arrived where it was going and recognized the place. They stood there for a while, in the dark before the morning, and eventually she tilted her head up and he bent his head down, and the thing that had been building for 7 years completed itself the way all real things complete, not with ceremony, not with drama, but with the absolute quiet certainty of something that has found exactly where it belongs. The morning was cold and clear. She went back to her room before the keep woke, and she sat at her desk and she opened her notebook. She did not write about what had happened. Some things were not for notebooks. She wrote about the next thing, because there was always a next thing, and she was, at her core, a person who moved forward, who used what she had learned to build what came next, who treated every resolved problem as the foundation of the work that followed. The work that followed, in this case, was significant. Davin Krail's arrest had closed the immediate threat, but it had also revealed a structural vulnerability in the Greymoor Pack security architecture that went well beyond one embedded operative. The self-reporting overnight system was only the most obvious gap. She had identified 7 others in the course of the investigation, each of them exploitable in ways that a sufficiently patient and sufficiently knowledgeable threat could use. She began writing the framework for the new security protocols. She wrote for 2 hours, until the keep came awake around her and the smell of the morning meal came through the corridor, and her body informed her, firmly, that it had been operating on 3 stitches and determination, and it now required food. She went to eat. She sat at the common table in the meal hall, which she did not always do, which she was aware produced a different kind of attention than she had received at the common table before the arrest. Not the particular invisible but present friction of an omega in a space where omegas were tolerated rather than included. Something else. Something that was still adjusting to its new shape. She ate. She went back to work. At midday Aldrin came to find her. He knocked, as always. Came in, as always. Sat across from her, as always. The as always had accumulated over a week into something that felt structural, something she was starting to build around the way you build around load-bearing things. "How is it going?" he asked. "Better than expected," she answered. "I identified 7 structural vulnerabilities during the investigation. I am writing the remediation framework." She looked up. "Our next departure creates a vacancy I want to discuss." "Tell me." "Corin," she told him. He handled the arrest correctly. He follows instructions precisely and asks the right questions afterward. He would make a good Sentinel commander, but not as a traditional appointment. She held up her notebook. "I want him reporting jointly to the Sentinel Division and to my office. Intelligence and security working from the same information, not separate streams." He looked at her. "That is a structural change to the division." "Yes." She met his gaze. "It is also correct." He considered it for approximately 4 seconds. "Done," he told her. She wrote it in her notebook. He watched her write. The room was quiet and warm, and outside the window the pack lands were cold and clear and safe in a way they had not been for 4 months. She was about to return to the framework when he spoke her name. She looked up. "Last night," he began. "I know," she told him. "I want to talk about it." She put her pen down. She gave him her full attention, which was something she did not do for everyone and which he had learned to recognize. Her answer was direct. "I have not changed my assessment." "Nor have I," he replied. "Then we are in agreement." "Yes." He looked at her with something entirely simple in the center of his expression. "We are." She picked her pen back up. She looked at the framework. "I should tell you," she began without looking up, "that I intend to be very methodical about this as well." "I know," he told her. He said it the same way he always said it when she warned him about her own nature, as if her nature was not a complication but a fact he had long since incorporated and found, on the whole, exactly what he wanted. "Good," she told him. She went back to work. He stayed, reading the council papers he had brought with him, and the room was quiet in the way rooms are quiet when the people in them have sorted out the most important things and can now attend to the rest. The framework took 3 more days. 3 weeks after the arrest, the Greymoor Pack looked different in ways that were not visible to the eye and entirely visible to anyone paying close attention, which was the distinction that had always mattered most to Mirela. The security protocols had been overhauled. Not by committee, which had been the plan before, but by her, working with Aldrin's authorization and a team she had assembled herself. 3 wolves she had identified during the investigation as having the right combination of skills and the right combination of qualities that had nothing to do with designation and everything to do with the particular way they paid attention to the world. A Delta named Pell with an eidetic memory and an instinct for pattern breaks that she had noticed in the way he filed duty reports, always one detail more specific than the form required, the sign of a mind that was not comfortable with approximation. A Gamma named Ren who had spent 4 years as a border trader and knew every unofficial crossing within a day's run, who had been assigned to domestic inventory work because her commanding officer had not seen the application and who had, in Mirela's assessment, been waiting for someone to see it. And Sura, the tracker. 27 years old, compact and fast, with close-cropped dark hair and light brown eyes that moved with the continuous restlessness of someone who was always following something. She had been assigned to domestic security. Mirela had moved her to field intelligence and watched her relocate into the new assignment with the specific ease of someone who had found the exact thing they were built for. She had done none of this alone. That was important and she was honest about it, in her own internal accounting. She had done it with a team and with authority and with resources that Aldrin had provided, and the combination of her analysis and his authority and the team's execution was what had produced the result. Not one of those 3 things alone. All 3 working from the same information toward the same purpose. This was, she had concluded, the correct model. Not her alone in the dark with a notebook. Her, with the right support, doing the thing she could do better than anyone else in the territory, properly resourced and properly positioned. The new protocols closed all 7 exploitable gaps she had identified. The self-reporting overnight assignment system was replaced with a paired confirmation structure requiring 2 signatories for any solo overnight post, cross-referenced automatically against the duty log. Simple, elegant, non-negotiable. Arnek had reviewed it before his reassignment and said nothing, which she interpreted as the closest he was currently capable of coming to approval. The communication audit produced 2 additional information leaks, both minor, both addressed. The formal case against Davin Crail was proceeding toward tribunal with an evidence package that the PAC's legal team described as the most comprehensive they had handled, which was understatement. The Ashfin PAC negotiations had changed character. 6 years of stalemate had given way to something actually moving, because Greymoor was now negotiating from the position of a documented grievance rather than an equal standoff, and the Ashfin leadership, who were not unintelligent, understood that the terms available to them now were better than the terms that would be available to them if they continued to resist. On the 22nd day after the arrest, Sura found a surveillance gap in the northwestern corridor that Mirela had not identified in her initial sweep. She brought the report to the morning briefing with the particular careful composure of someone who is slightly nervous about telling the person who designed the system that the system has a gap. Mirela read the report. She read it a second time. She looked at Sura. "You are correct," she told her. Sura let out a breath that was very carefully managed. "Good catch," Mirela continued. "Write it up with your recommended remediation and bring it back tomorrow." She paused. "And do not be nervous about identifying gaps in my frameworks. That is exactly what I need you to do. If you find more, bring them. The point of the team is not to confirm my work. It is to improve it." Sura looked at her with an expression that was not quite what Mirela expected, something that was adjusting in real time to an environment it had not encountered before. "Understood," Sura told her. "Good," Mirela replied. "Go write it up." Sura went. Mirela looked at the northwestern corridor notation in her own map and she wrote a small correction in the margin and she moved on to the next thing. Pell found her at noon. He knocked on the office door with the specific knock she had already learned to associate with him, 2 quick raps and then a wait, and she told him to come in. He came in with a set of comparison charts in his hands and the expression of someone who has been awake too long processing something interesting. "The Ashfin communication pattern," he told her. "I ran it against the full Crail archive." She paused. "There are 7 months of communications that predate his promotion to Arnek's command. Which means his access to the information he was transmitting during that period was not coming from the senior rotation schedule. It was coming from somewhere else. She looked at him. Show me. He spread the charts on her desk. She leaned over them. She looked at the charts for 90 seconds. There is a second source, she told him. Yes. His expression was the expression of someone who had hoped she would arrive at the same place and had. Not active. She studied the pattern. The communications shifted to senior-level material 4 months ago when his access changed. Before that the material was specific but lower level. Someone who had access to patrol schedules but not the full rotation architecture. I have a candidate, Pell offered. Tell me. He named a name she did not recognize immediately and then did, a junior logistics coordinator who had left the pack 8 months ago, citing personal reasons, whose departure had not been flagged as security sensitive. She wrote it down. She wrote the pattern alongside it. Write up the full analysis, she told him. I want it on my desk by morning. She looked at him. This is good work. He gave a small precise nod and went back to his desk. She sat with the notation for a moment. A second source. Already gone, which meant no immediate threat, but the existence of it meant the Ashvin operation had been larger and longer and more carefully constructed than even she had assessed. Which meant her assessment of the Ashvin pack needed revision. Which meant the negotiations were happening against a more complex background than the Greymoor Council currently understood. She picked up her pen. She began writing the addendum. The work continued. It always did. That was the thing about this work, it was not a problem to be solved once and set aside. It was an ongoing relationship with the reality of threat and the reality of safety, which were always in motion relative to each other, and which required continuous attention to keep in the right proportion. She had understood this intellectually before. She understood it differently now that she had the team and the office and the authority, now that the attention was supported rather than solitary, now that what she built had the structure to hold. At the end of the 22nd day Aldrin came to the office. He knocked. He came in. He sat across from her. The routine of it was settled now, familiar in a way that had not been there a month ago and that she had not expected to find as grounding as she found it. Pell found a second source, she told him before he could speak. Historical. 8 months back. Already gone. But it changes the picture of the Ashvin operation and I need to brief you on the addendum before the negotiation update goes to the council. He said, show me. She showed him. He read the addendum and the comparison charts and he asked 3 questions, all of them the right questions, and she answered all 3 of them with the completeness they deserved. At the end of it he was quiet for a moment. Then he told her, you should present this to the council directly. She looked at him. I was planning to send it through your office. I know, he replied. I am suggesting you present it yourself. He met her eyes. You built this intelligence. You understand it better than anyone. The council needs to understand what they are working with in these negotiations, and they need to understand it from the person who found it. She considered this. It was a different kind of presence than she had been building, more visible, more formal. The comfortable invisibility of working through Aldrin's office was easier. Easier was not the point. She told him, I will prepare the briefing for Friday. Good, he replied. She looked at her notebook. He looked at her. The lamp was burning. Outside the window the pack lands were dark and the winter sky was clear and cold and full of stars. She asked without looking up, are you sleeping? 4 hours, he told her. That is not enough. It never has been. She looked up. The system I built covers the overnight intelligence review without your direct oversight until morning briefing. You gain 2 hours minimum if you use it. He looked at her with the expression that was warm in the center. You designed a system to make me sleep more. I designed a system that is more efficient, she corrected. The sleep is incidental. Mirela, he started. It is a side benefit I considered relevant, she finished. He said, yes. And the word covered both the system and the side benefit. She went back to her notebook. He did not leave. He had papers of his own. He spread them on the corner of her desk that had developed into his corner of her desk over the past week, which was a thing that had happened without discussion and which she had not objected to. They worked in the same room for an hour. Then she closed her notebook and she set her pen down and she looked at him across the desk. She spoke his name, Aldrin. He looked up. I want to tell you something. He waited. I have been thinking, she told him carefully, about the distinction between what I am and what I was designated as. She paused. Not in a difficult way. In the way of someone completing a thought they started a long time ago. She met his eyes. I am Omega. That is a real thing, not a mistake in the system. The depth of perception I carry, the way my wolf works, the specific kind of attention I have, all of that is Omega. It is not something I have despite my designation. It is something I have because of it. He was listening the way he listened, fully. She continued, what was wrong was never the designation. What was wrong was everyone's understanding of what the designation meant. Including, for a long time, mine. She paused. I spent a great deal of energy trying to prove I was not what they said I was. I think what I was actually proving was that what I was is not what they said it was. She paused again. There is a difference. Yes, he told her. There is. She continued, I am telling you this because I think it is the most important thing I have understood in the last month, and I wanted you to have it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke carefully. You told me once that you took my name because it was the closest thing you had, at 12, to saying something you did not have the language for yet. Yes. Do you have the language now? He asked. She looked at him. She thought about 12 and the eastern border and the look she had spent 7 years trying to name, and she thought about the library and the 7 years of filed material and the morning and the shift in the dark and all of it, every single piece of it, leading here, to this office, to this desk, to this specific conversation. Yes, she told him. I do. He waited. She told him, you. Still. After all of it. You. She delivered it the way she delivered everything that was completely confirmed, without qualification and without performance, the way you state a fact about the world that you have tested thoroughly and found to hold. He came around the desk. He stood in front of her and she stood up and they were very close in the way that had been building for 7 years and was now simply where they stood. He said her name, the way he had always said her name, with that additional weight, and she looked up at him and she was looking at everything that had been there the whole time, patient and certain and waiting. She told him, I know. He said, yes. She tilted her head up. He bent his head down. And the thing that had been building for 7 years completed itself in the quiet of a stone office in the late night of a winter that was ending, completed itself the way all real things complete, not with announcement or ceremony or the loud declaration of something that needs to convince anyone, but with the absolute and private certainty of something that has found exactly the shape it was always going to have. Outside the window the pack was sleeping. The new duty system was running its first full-month cycle. Sura was finishing the Northwestern Corridor remediation report. Pell's second source analysis was on its way to completion. The Ashfin negotiations were moving. Davin Crail's tribunal was 6 days out. The wolf inside her was completely still. Not the vigilant stillness of something watching for threat. Not the waiting stillness of something that has not yet arrived where it is going. The deep, settled stillness of something at home. In the morning she would brief the council. She would present the second source addendum in her own voice and she would answer the questions the council put to her with the completeness they deserved, and some of the council would adjust faster than others and all of them would adjust eventually because the evidence did not leave room for other conclusions. In the morning the work would continue, as it always did, as it would continue for as long as there was work to be done, which was to say indefinitely. In the morning she would be Mireille Voss, Omega, Chief Pack Intelligence Analyst, the person who had seen what no one else had seen and done what no one else had thought she could do, and she would do the next thing with the same patient, precise, devastating attention she brought to everything that mattered. But that was the morning. Right now, in the quiet of the office with the lamp burning and the winter sky full of cold stars outside the window and the alpha of the Greymore pack standing close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, she simply stood in the thing she had built, which was not only the security protocols and the intelligence office and the team and the remade organizational structure. Which was also this. Also him. Also the 7 years of carefully filed and finally examined material, resolved into something that had no more need of a library because it was no longer stored away but fully present, fully known, fully hers. She had not been given any of it. She had built it. All of it. From the bottom, in the dark, alone, with a notebook and a pen and the absolute refusal to let her designation tell her what she was capable of. The world had told her she was nothing. She had proven the world wrong in every possible direction. And now she stood in the proof of it, in the warm quiet of a life she had made from nothing and which was exactly what she had always been working toward, even in the years before she had the language for it. Especially in those years. The wolf in her settled deeper. The lamp burned warm. The pack slept safe beyond the walls. She went back to work. She always did. That was the truest thing about her, and the world was finally beginning to understand it.